Well, Shivani, thank you so much for helping my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
For sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me. My name is Shivani Ganesh. I'm currently a senior in aerospace engineering at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So ILL, if it wasn't already obvious. And I'm really interested in human spaceflight, and that's kind of where I think I want to go in my career. I've interned at the Adler Planetarium and Lockheed, and I'm planning to go back to Lockheed next summer. And I'm really stoked for the moon landing in the coming decade. I'm really looking forward to it.
How did you get interested in aerospace?
So I've always been a huge nerd. I think that's a pretty common theme, which is a great thing. But when I was really, really young, I went to Kennedy Space Center and a joint trip with Disney World because they're both some of the most magical places I think on Earth. But I was so intent on getting this American Girl doll because all my friends had it back in the day. I wasn't even interested in space at the time. And throughout most of the tour of KSC, I didn't have my head in the game. But then when I got to the mock-up of the Launch Control Center, that was the end. Since then, I've kind of been on this straight shot path to keep getting back there and getting back into the space industry. So thanks to young Shivani for actually paying attention for once to decide the career trajectory.
Um, what do you think space flight will be like in, say, the next few years? Like, how do you think it would change? I mean, it's been sort of like this big group project where, we have tens of thousands of people trying to send just a couple of people into orbit, which is, it's hard to see the transition from that to actually having colonies in other parts of the solar system. I was just wondering, in your mind, how do you see things changing?
Absolutely. So, in my opinion, I think this is a huge rebirth of the human spaceflight venture. I don't think I've ever seen, besides reading about it in history books, I've never seen anything like this in about people getting so excited about a singular cause in history. And we saw this when Mercury through Apollo was getting started, and everyone was automatically really in the game. I think we're seeing that a lot with the youth as well. Students in my year, we talk about it all the time how we're finally in a generation where landing on the moon is a possibility again, but also we can actually be a part of it, whether you're in the capacity of being an engineer, a scientist, or a million other careers. So I think it's accelerating very quickly, but I think it's kind of recurrence of that amazing time in the 50s to 60s. And I can't wait to hopefully be a part of that kind of history.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing you be part of it too. Um, I started these interviews December 17th of 2019. I was interviewing people on the streets and at coffee shops and things like that. And did that up until like the middle of March last year, and then COVID happened, of course.
Yeah.
And most of the people I talked to did not know we were planning to send people back to the moon in 2024. Do you find that surprising?
Sadly, yes. I think sometimes as a student, I kind of live in a bubble. Now we live in an actual COVID bubble. But we're so surrounded by space news all the time that it's hard to believe that people outside of this little sphere don't know what's going on. But that's, I think, the trend with like most fields. But another thing that kind of worries me at times is science illiteracy. I don't know if that's the correct terminology to really put here, but it's being like define it as just being up to date with what's happening in the science world. I think a lot of people don't really keep up with it as much as they should, just because it does directly impact their lives, and it impacts history and how our funds are going to be distributed and how our priorities are going to be assigned, that kind of thing. So I find that a little worrisome, but not unexpected. Hopefully, it will change as we keep moving forward, and these kind of science educators are really stepping out there and making a name for themselves.
Yeah, I think one challenge with science, especially as it becomes so specialized, and um, I mean, you have this whole separate language and concept for science. It's like the people that are doing the leading edge research, like the distance between them and like the average everyday person is so big, they
Mhm.
really can't understand each other at all.
Yeah, yeah. That's it was really frustrating when I was growing up because I feel like the only science communicators I had were my science teachers, who I looked up to greatly, and then Bill Nye. Bill Nye, I still look up to. To be honest, he's the best. But I think there is, like I said, a new age of science educators are hopefully trying to bridge that gap that you were talking about, like the Space Scout with her new Netflix show, Emily's Wonder Lab, things like that. I think are really going to help. Maybe not as much the adults of our generation, but the kids who are growing up in a more science focused world. They can start off and hit the ground running, and make sure that they understand as they go forward in life.
You know, um, I think one place that we also need to see some improvement is science as a subject versus science as a process. And I mean, so much science I think is taught as memorize these facts, work out these formulas with these, and make sure your solution matches these other solutions,
Mhm.
as opposed to what's that process of observation, reflection, theory formation, experiment, validation, you know,
Yeah.
and I was wondering what you thought about that, and if you saw any improvements in those areas.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge misconception that it's a bunch of facts you have to memorize. And I mean, I love flashcards as much as the next person, but I think from the time that I really thought science was viable and engineering was viable as a career was when I realized problem solving is what the core of that actually is. I remember like learning about this in high school physics. That to this day, I think that's the hardest class I've ever taken. My physics teacher did not let us get off easy. And her whole purpose was giving us literally every type of problem that we could solve and being creative with how we approach it, but also understand what was happening in the proposed situation that we could apply what we've learned to fix that problem. And that was the first major situation where I felt like it's not just memorizing formulas or memorizing situations, it's really being agile in your problem solving skills. And it's just really fun. Like when you finally get a problem right after like the 15th try, that's what makes science and engineering just ultimately cool.
Um, and in terms of like getting it right, I mean, ideally you have your kind of researchers and what have you looking into things that we don't know what the right answer is. Uh,
Yeah.
and as a science student, we're always like comforted because you work out the problem. You're like, oh, this must be right. And then you look at the back of the book and you're like, oh, those answers are right, so I must have been right. But
Mhm.
whenever you're on that leading edge of research, you don't know if you're right or not. You just
Yeah.
know if you just have like some type of level of confidence that it might be right. And
Yeah.
it seems like that's a difficult journey to go to go from that point where you feel like you're always right to I really don't know. I was just wondering what do you think that journey looks like for those scientists?
Yeah. I always said that I wanted to be like on the bleeding edge of things to be where you innovate, but it's really scary to be wrong, especially in the realm of human spaceflight, because literally lives are on the line. And oftentimes, if you're working really closely with, like, you will know them, you'll know their families, and that puts a lot of extra pressure, I think, especially on human spaceflight. Um, but I think what New Space is doing with really innovating and trying again and again, even if it supposedly fails, I think is really impressive. Like a couple of friends of mine were working on a lab report really late at night, but then we stopped to watch the Starship test, and I was really scared because when obviously like it exploded and everything came apart. Um, and my first thought was obviously, oh my gosh, they didn't get it right. That's really scary. Just coming from I want to be right on the first try. But then, of course, everyone is applauding and celebrating as they should have been because that was a major accomplishment, and they got a lot of it right. And so again, that's part of the innovation process is failing, and learning that as engineering students can be kind of intimidating, but I think it's necessary.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And uh, well, I mean, coming back to finding out that we're actually sending people to the moon in 2024, one of the people I interviewed during that time period was a Rice student. And the thing about Rice is Jim Bridenstine, he went to Rice and he
Mhm.
actually came to Rice twice in the year before last to actually talk about us going back to the moon for some events and what have you. And he had no idea that we are going to the moon in 2024, this Rice student. So like even within the same campus from which there had actually been, the current NASA administrator went to who visited twice for various things. Um, it seems like that even with inside schools, there's a lot of information bubbles about these types of things. I was just wondering at your school, what have you found to be an effective way to reach out, into these kind of areas that may not be aware of uh, us
Yeah,
going back to the moon?
that's a really good question. Um, so I'm really lucky that I have a very close knit and wonderful department within the aerospace engineering branch at UAUC. And there's a lot of events hosted. So a lot of alumni come back and talk about the research and how that directly relates to big missions like going back to the moon. So, in a way, there's always a plethora of opportunities provided to the department to keep us engaged with that cutting edge set of research. But my SEDS organization, so the Illinois Space Society, which are my people. They're really, really great. They're the space enthusiasts that keep me running really late at night when homework just seems impossible. Um, but we do a lot of educational outreach. So we go out into our community and host a variety of programs telling kids about what careers are available in space, why is it so important, what is unique and crazy and difficult to understand about it. And we often try to bring it back to how you can get involved. And that is almost directly attached to the process of getting back to the moon and all the resulting successes that will come after that. And eventually, when they hopefully go through these STEM careers and get to be a part of it, they can report back to us and hopefully spread that message themselves.
And do y'all go to like elementary schools, middle schools, high schools?
We do a variety of things, K through 12th, really. When we do in person, well, when we did in person before the whole COVID thing happened, we did a lot of elementary school visits, but we did a couple science club, middle school meetups. So we got to build like little egg drop landers, little gliders, that kind of thing. Uh, Turns out building a slingshot glider is very difficult. I was not able to do it, but like the kids got it, so it's fine. But and then we're trying to put together a virtual high school mentorship panel with students who are interested in those kind of careers, because after you build on all these awesome experiments, it's kind of time to see how that translates into a career within the aerospace industry. So yeah.
And you mentioned you did an internship at Lockheed. Did you work on the Orion team or some other part?
So I was actually in the aeronautics division this past time. So I love space. That was something I grew up loving, but I always was into military aviation as well. I think defense is super important. It's kind of been a precursor to getting space up and running. So I was working on the F-35 program under an operational role.
Oh, okay. And so we're going back to the moon. We're going there to stay. The biggest question I get is, what do we hope to get out of it? Like, why? Why now? What do you think?
Oh my gosh, that's a very big question. What do we hope to get out of it? A lot of cool lunar rocks. That'd be great. I mean, the museums need it. I want to see it. It'll be great. Um, First, I think it falls under like three major categories, right? So scientific objectives, uh, international collaboration, and settling for setting the foundation for future missions. So they're kind of intertwined, but scientific objectives, obviously. The last time and the last set of data that we got from the moon from human landings was obviously during Apollo. And with such a gap in between, you can only depend on the data for so long. And you want to increase that set. Um, it's also very interesting because humans are the most delicate payload, in my opinion, that you could possibly have thought to send. But they're also the most capable, which kind of leads to the second one, which is international collaboration. Because you can bring together so many different agencies and countries into this mix, you're going to get such a diversified think tank to make sure that your technology is the best it can be and it runs as smoothly as possible. And then lastly is settling for the futures. I'm always a very much a long-term planner. So going to the moon in 2024 is a goal, right? But that's just one stone on this whole road that we're trying to get to. We're eventually colonizing Mars and then venturing past the solar system. Uh, I think that long term goals should be kept in mind because ultimately that's what's going to get us to expand as a species and as a civilization. I know I
I
speak very broadly, but it's very exciting.
I know I that is completely my goal as well. But I talk to a lot of people who do other things, and you know they're very polite, but I could kind of tell that maybe the message doesn't quite resonate with them.
Yeah.
How widely in society do you think people have this idea of humanity spreading out into the rest of the solar system and the galaxy? Like, do you think it's a really small fringe set of people, or is there some uh, broader group that might actually think that as well, but just far distant future? Or do you think there's really a lot of people in society that are just like, we have no clue what you're talking about? Like,
So I think as of now, it's definitely a it's the how do I describe it? I think practically in my friend group, a lot of people are realists, right? They are very practical about what career that they want to go for, the iterative steps. And I think I find myself in that situation a lot as well. Like I said, I'm a planner. Like I know where I want to be, and I try to be very organized about it. That being said, I think with again new space, but also a lot of the projects that the government and old space companies are bringing together, are giving this whole like building a civilization beyond the solar system a chance, because we're able to start building the technology for and the basis for that now. um, I guess to like more directly answer your question, I think right now it seems kind of like an impractical but very exciting idea, and so I think in the coming years it'll become more feasible, and therefore that kind of attitude will spread because more belief will be generated with a good basis of technology underneath it.
yeah, it's easier to believe that people live on the moon if people are going to and from the moon on a regular basis.
Yeah, it's kind of like a prove it thing, and we did prove it. But I think with such a large gap, like I said, between Apollo and now, there's another iteration. Like you have to keep it going and show a good record before you can boast that kind of idea. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, one of the things I'm doing this year is watching the interview that I did exactly a year ago, just to
Mhm.
see how it feels a year afterwards. And
Yeah.
earlier this week, I was watching a guy, and he said one of the reasons he thought we should go back is so that people would believe we actually went the first time, which I thought was a good reason.
Yeah.
But I think there is this disbelief thing. It's like, I mean, can you imagine showing the Wright brothers plane to somebody and then talking about, how you could buy like airline tickets across the world and they'll be cheap and safe?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was so one of my favorite periods of history is the 60s. And I've talked about it a lot already, so sorry. But that's why I find it so interesting is because literally the math was not even created to make those kind of missions possible. And a lot of people are like, that's never gonna happen. But then it did. And then so I because of that kind of those kind of happenings, I think this is possible. It's just gonna take some time to get the public's trust again. But that kind of excitement that existed in that era, I think I see it brewing now, which is really exciting to see.
Yeah, definitely. Now, you talked about the math wasn't even created then, and a lot of people talk about innovation spin-offs from the space program as being one thing that we hope to get. And that was definitely true in the Apollo era because we didn't know how to do it and we were literally trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
But it's like once we figured it out and the cost is so high, it's like you almost can't afford to do experimental things because the cost of failure is so high, you know? And I was also talking to a flight controller earlier this or last week, and he was talking about mission control. I mean, and if you look at the hardware that's used, like the computing hardware in mission control, it's like museum stuff.
Yeah.
It's not where the innovative uh, solution's going to come from. And so I'm kind of, I love space. I want us to see us go into the universe, right? I want it to succeed, and I want people to be excited about it. But I want to make sure the foundation is like firm, and not to have like fluffy stuff. Get rid of
Yeah.
the fluffy stuff. And so I'm kind of presented with this challenge of, uh, you know, maybe our idea that we're going to get technological innovations of spinoffs from our space program isn't quite as true as it used to be. And
Mhm.
just because we are trying to reduce risk and we need everybody to back up the solutions and what's the strongest solution than the one that worked last time. And if it's the same thing that worked last time, then what's new? And if it's not new, where's innovation?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think my engineering philosophy has evolved to like kind of just be in the literal line between the two. I always love looking into heritage technologies. I think that's super important to understand where you came from. I took a class the spring of my junior year called Intro to Human Spaceflight, and the entire thing was just talking about the archetypes of human spaceflight vehicles and understanding what everything that went into it. And the whole purpose was understanding your foundations, that if you ever pursue innovation in that category, you know exactly what came before you. But at the same time, I think sometimes that, and this is again from like a very much student approach, I have a lot to learn. I really have a lot to learn. But at the same time, if you depend so closely on heritage technologies, how much are you really challenging yourself to think more agilely or more creatively if you're already depending on something else? So it's an interesting dilemma, and that's why I think the more engineers and the more diversified of backgrounds, the better, because that's going to lead to the most concrete result, in my opinion.
That makes sense. And I have a lot to learn too. I'm constantly learning, and but the one thing I'd also tell you, I hope this rings true with you too, is I think you have a lot to teach too.
Yeah,
And
like passing on the information, passing on the passion, especially, is very important.
absolutely. Um, what do you say to those people that are like, we have global climate change and poverty and all these problems down here. Why are we sending people to the moon? Uh, what do you think about that?
Because it's the greatest achievement, I think, of the human race. I truly believe that's it. I mean, in my mind, there's been nothing like it. But also, on a more technological note, obviously, like a lot of the advancements that we make in the aerospace industry are directly tied to bettering life on Earth. And we saw with the new administration coming in with the volunteer team and the new revised objectives, it's going to be still going to the moon, maybe at a later date. I don't think they've concretely decided, but increasing Earth sciences and remote sensing pursuits in the effort to really understand more about climate change. And I think that's really interesting because it's this is something that is ebbed and flowed with every administration, based on what the the new administration really thinks is most important to their constituents. But I guess like the answer to why we should go back to the moon is, again, like it's the greatest innovation that we could have possibly pursued. It helps Earth directly with the technology that it creates in the process. Um, but also it's going to change with each administration, so it's not as dependable as we'd like it to see. But hopefully, whatever data that we do collect during each round, I guess, is going to help us understand climate change better and help protect our planet better.
And then you have another group of people that are like, the moon, we've been there. Why are we going back? Shouldn't we be going to Mars?
Mhm.
What do you think?
So I think that comes back to the philosophy of depending on heritage technology. That's building on what you know. That's like the whole point of engineering school, is like just doing it again and again and again. And yeah, so like if you go to the moon, you're gonna be able to set that foundation, like we've been talking about, having a foundation to go to Mars. Um, but also, when we think about human spaceflight, we think about our astronauts and their safety. And when they're putting their lives on the line to do this very innovative adventure, we want to make sure that they're within our range at least the first few times that we try it, that they are safe, and if anything were to happen, God forbid, they could come back in a reasonable amount of time. Whereas Mars being so many miles away, um, that is a lot more dangerous of a path to go. And so I think our astronaut safety should definitely be taken into account, and hence why we should go to the moon before we go to Mars.
And I've been reading this book by Paul Dye. It's called, I think, Shuttle Flight or Flight Shuttle, one of the two. But he was a flight director.
Mhm.
And as I'm reading the book, the thing that really hits home to me is that the astronauts are so dependent upon a team of like literally hundreds or even thousands of engineers on the ground to support
Yeah.
them.
Mhm.
Like anything goes wrong, they radio down about what it is, they go to work, they figure out solution, they radio up the solution. And It's hard to imagine that process working so well whenever it's like 15 to 30 minutes round trip for the radio signals.
Yeah.
Uh,
I Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and so essentially they had to figure out some way to take that entire support group and bring it with them.
Exactly, yeah. And you can build as autonomous of a system as you want, but at the end of the day, having a team that you know is dependable and within reach is going to greatly increase the confidence of the astronauts that are going to go out there, but also boost the mission controls staff and make sure that they feel safe with whatever EPA or AMU, whatever they're going to pursue next.
If it was safe and affordable, would you go to space?
Yes.
Like, how safe does it need to be?
I don't know. I maybe I'm thinking more with the risk taker aspect of this in mind. So my risk tolerance is pretty high here. But okay, so once Dragon has proven itself. But once a few more missions have flown, that'd be a great option if they were ever to accept a student. But yeah, I think as a young person with a lot to learn, I will go wherever they tell me to go because I just want to learn.
So you would go to orbit, like ISS for a week or two.
Yeah, that'd be great. I've always wanted to go. I mean, I grew up wanting actually to be a flight controller and a flight director. So, well, astronaut wasn't my first goal. For some reason, for some random reason, if there's no one more qualified, I highly doubt that'll ever happen. But um, I've always wanted to go to the ISS and do hydroponics research. I think it's so cool growing plants in space. It's one of the most important things when we start colonizing new planets is to have a sustainable food source. So doing hydroponics experiments on the ISS would be a dream come true.
That sounds awesome. And I think I read something about NanoRacks doing some experiments along those lines with like a UAE company or.
Yeah, and that was really cool to see because that kind of ties back into the international collaboration aspect. It's back in the day, like the U.S. was and the U.S. and the Soviet Union were kind of the only big players, right? But now people from all around the world are able to take part and conduct science experiments, and I think that's really cool.
So would you also go to the moon?
Again, that one was more. There's plenty of people more qualified, but given the opportunity, yes, that'd be great. Because
One-way trip to Mars?
ooh, see, that's a thing. The one way kind of gets me. I like my feet on the ground and the earth ground. um, but yeah, I think it comes back to the innovative aspect of being on the cutting edge. So at first I'd be a little concerned, but I think ultimately I'd go for it.
And how cheap does it need to be? I mean, like in terms of like annual salary, would it be like a whole year's of salary or 10 years or 20 years? Like how much would you be willing to
Huh.
spend?
Save up all my birthday money. No, I think I'd be willing to spend like 5 years worth of salary, hopefully in a decent paying engineering gig. Um, but ultimately, it's you're going for the experience, something that very few people in the world and in history have ever gotten to go through. So yeah, I think I'd ultimately spend 5 years of my paychecks on it.
Have you heard of a thing called Space Hero?
I have not actually.
So it's a global well, global and worldwide. It's a worldwide reality TV show contest.
Huh.
The winner of which will go to the International Space Station for 10 days.
Hmm.
And there's been lots of ventures like that mentioned before, but the thing that made me think this was a little bit more credible was that Axiom Space, which has that all private mission coming up, said
Yeah.
that they've contracted to send the winner. And I've looked into it a little bit more, and it seems legitimate. But is that something you would participate in?
I think. Hmm. See, that's very interesting because I think if it was ever science focused, so if I were selected to be an astronaut through NASA, I think it would be much more of a desire to go just because I grew up loving it. But I've always had a lot of questions about the commercial spaceflight industry just because I think like allowing people to go up into orbit is very exciting and it's going to make so many people's lives so magical and that's great. Um, but I don't know, actually. I'm a little bit more skeptical just because, again, it hasn't been proven yet as as much as past missions. So yeah, the answer is I don't know.
I talked to that flight controller. He was responsible for scheduling the astronauts' time, and he's like, I'm really excited about the commercial aspects, but at the same token, we have like these trained astronauts that are up there, and now we're going to have tourists, and that's like special to have them on the station. They shouldn't really be there. So he's like a little bit conflicted. I just wonder if you had a little bit of that same conflict, maybe.
I think I do. I think it just, and again, like this is just my opinion, but I think my attitude towards industry, I'm a little bit more of an old space gal, in the sense of I really appreciate when the government and companies are working together, like government contractors are working together to make these kind of missions happen. And it's when it's more of a job, I think, more than a joyride. And I guess like that was part of working. So I work since I worked in the F-35 program with Lockheed. It kind of affirmed what I've always grown up with, which is that defense is very important, and the government is very important to the success of, I think, space exploration because they're so intertwined. Um, I think I've always looked at it as more of a job than just an opportunity to experience something new, if that makes sense. So, yeah, I think I would agree maybe a little bit more with the flight controller in that being an astronaut is more of a responsibility and shouldn't be taken lightly. So, yeah, I think that's where I personally stand.
Well, and another controversial thing, what about sending Tom Cruise to the International Space Station?
I do love a good space movie. Um,
It probably won't be a good space movie. Yeah.
I every time there's a good like there's a space movie coming out, and it looks like a tinge artsy, I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this. That was how I felt about Ad Astra, and as soon as I watched it, I'm sorry, like I couldn't do it. It was very difficult. So, in the hope that it's a good movie, maybe, but at the same time, I think I retain my old opinion of it's more of a gift. So, or, I mean, sorry, it's more of a responsibility to be an astronaut. So I don't know if that's the best idea of sending up an actor. But again, just my opinion.
But you talk about getting the attention of a lot of people that probably wouldn't pay any attention to space or space exploration.
This is true. This is true. That so I think there's some like an interesting caveat here. So like let's say there's like a science educator like the Space Gal or Bill Nye, if they got the opportunity to go up to the ISS and do a lesson from there or talk about the research that's going on in the habitat and have it very STEM and STEAM education focused, I would be a super big fan of that. But for some reason I find I can't even quite name why, but I feel like I'm drawing this weird conflict with people who haven't trained for so long to do these kind of missions. But at the same time, this kind of movie, the same way that Interstellar and Avatar and those kind of movies were for me, that could be the driver for a lot of kids to pursue STEM. So at the end of the day, it is still a sort of space education, just kind of space inspiration, I guess.
Would you feel more comfortable sending a scientist?
I think I would, and that's probably just because of my background. But yeah, I think sending more STEAM related uh, professionals makes sense.
How
But again,
about how about a teacher?
oh, I love yes. I think that's super cool. Um, I can't remember his last name for some reason, but oh, Joseph Acaba, I think that's his name. He was a Peace Corps volunteer and a high school science and math teacher, I believe. And now he's one of the 18 astronauts that are a part of the Artemis roster. I always looked up to him so much because of his background and how he used his STEM and STEAM knowledge to use it for education. And then he's planning on using that also when he goes back to the ISS and to the moon, etc. So I find that really admirable. Just because I had a lot of great teachers growing up that shaped me into who I was.
Oh, I know. I've talked to so many people, and their interest in space often goes back to an individual teacher that they had that was just enthusiastic about the subject.
Yeah,
Well, I really appreciate your time. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
I think we covered a lot of good topics today. I think we're good. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate are you pursuing a student's perspective, especially because we're so early on in the industry. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to hearing more about this project.
Sounds good. Well, you have a good rest of your day then.
Thank you so much. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye bye.